Why do more than half of all marriages end in divorce, while in the remaining half, many people are merely staying rather than truly being happy? What happened between two individuals who once vowed lifelong love, only to become strangers under the same roof? This video does not seek familiar answers such as a lack of effort or not enough love. Instead, it goes deeper into the very biture of the love we have long believed in. Through the cold philosophical lens of Nietzsche, modern marriage is placed on the operating table. Are we building families on genuine understanding or merely on a temporary emotional illusion? If you have ever loved, ever been disappointed, ever questioned whether love can truly endure, this video may force you to reconsider your most familiar beliefs and change the way you understand marriage, family, and yourself. Most relationships begin the same way. An intense feeling emerges rapidly and takes over the mind. The heart beats faster than usual. The presence of the other person makes the world feel more vivid. Everything seems right, aligned, carrying the belief that this is not merely an encounter, but destiny. In that moment, people believe they have found what they have been searching for all along: completeness. This feeling is so powerful that it overrides all rational warnings. Unclear points are ignored. Differences are interpreted romantically. Signs of instability are given softer names. People do not love the other person as they truly are. They love the feeling that person gives them. And from here, illusion begins to form. Society encourages turning this moment into the foundation for long-term commitments. When emotions are at their peak, people are urged to hold on, to fix in place, to transform something fluid into something immutable. They sign legal bindings, merge lives, finances, and futures with the belief that their present emotions are proof of future permanence. Yet very few people stop to ask, what if this feeling changes? If the very thing that makes them so certain today no longer exists tomorrow, what will remain to support the relationship? The problem is not that people long for attachment. The problem is that they mistake a short-term psychological state for a long-term truth. They believe the initial intensity reflects the true nature of the relationship, when in reality, it merely reflects their own internal state at that moment. Marriage, as it is commonly constructed, is based on the assumption that human beings can freeze emotions, sustain intensity, and remain unchanged over time. But humans do not function that way. They change, adapt, expand, or contract, depending on their environment. When a relationship is built on the illusion of permanence, conflict is not surprising. It is inevitable. From the very beginning, marriage carries a paradox within it. It demands permanence from a state that is inherently temporary. And when the initial illusion dissolves, many fail to realize that what is collapsing is not love itself, but the false belief they placed upon it. When a relationship is newly formed, people often believe they are making their most rational decisions. They assume that strong emotion is evidence of certainty, that intuition is guiding them accurately. In reality, this is precisely the moment when reason is most thoroughly pushed aside. In the early stage of attachment, the brain operates under an unusual mechanism. Instead of analyzing, comparing, and projecting long-term outcomes, the mind prioritizes pleasure, excitement, and the immediate need for connection. Warning signals that would be obvious in other relationships become blurred. People do not see the whole picture. They only see what makes them tremble. What is striking is that society does not discourage this state. On the contrary, it glorifies it. Major decisions are encouraged as early as possible, moving in together, making the relationship public, planning a shared future. Emotional peaks are treated as the right moment for binding commitments, when in fact, this is when the capacity to assess risk and difference is at its lowest. People often fail to realize that they are making irreversible decisions while in a state very different from their normal selves. They believe the person they are today is a stable version, that today's feelings will be identical years later. But this is rarely true. The initial psychological state is not a solid foundation. It is a transitional phase. This confusion gives rise to a dangerous paradox. The choices that require the greatest clarity are made when people are at their least clear-minded. Emotion replaces evaluation. Belief replaces verification. Hope replaces understanding. And because everything feels right, no one asks the uncomfortable question, do I truly understand this person and myself well enough to commit for the long term? Once bindings are established, people become locked into their own decisions. When emotions change, they do not return to the starting point to question the rationality of the original choice. Instead, they blame themselves or blame the other person, believing that something went wrong along the way, rather than being flawed from the very beginning. Most later breakdowns do not originate from change itself, but from a lack of clarity at the moment of commitment. People do not fail because they cannot sustain their initial emotions, but because they placed too much responsibility on a psychological state, never designed to carry the weight of the future. When reason is excluded from the meeting room from the outset, every subsequent decision becomes merely an attempt to patch a foundation that was misplaced from the beginning. And by the time this is realized, the price to be paid is often no longer small. There is no single moment that marks the change in a relationship. It does not arrive as a major shock, but through very small details. Conversations that once lasted for hours now end sooner. Gestures that once made the heart tremble become familiar. The presence of the other person no longer brings novelty, but turns into part of routine. This is the stage that leaves many people most confused. They begin to ask what has changed, who has changed, and whether the relationship is going in the wrong direction. Yet most fail to realize that what is happening is not decline, but exposure. As the initial emotional veil thins, reality begins to come into view. Differences once concealed can no longer be avoided. How each person responds to stress, to money, to family, to the future becomes clearer. Traits once considered charming begin to feel irritating. Silences once interpreted as understanding now become distance. People no longer see each other through feeling, but through behaviors repeated day after day. What is notable is that most relationships do not collapse at this point. Instead, they enter a suspended phase. Both remain, but with the sense that something is no longer as it once was. They try to restore the initial emotions, believing that with enough effort, everything will return to the way it was. But they do not understand that what they are searching for is not a problem to be fixed, but a phase that has already ended. When truth emerges, the relationship is confronted with a difficult question. Are these two people truly compatible once the blur of initial emotion is gone? This is a question few dare to face honestly, because the answer may trigger changes that are profound and painful. Rather than confronting it, many choose to reinterpret reality. They convince themselves that boredom is normal, that a lack of connection is temporary, that all relationships are like this. These statements provide short-term comfort, but they also gradually silence the ability to listen to one's own genuine feelings. From this moment on, the relationship no longer operates through discovery, but through subtle endurance. Two people learn to adapt to each other rather than understand each other. They begin to adjust expectations, lower desires, and accept things that once troubled them. The moment truth speaks does not immediately destroy the relationship. But when ignored, it lays the groundwork for deeper conflicts later on. For when people are not seen and are not allowed to live in alignment with their true feelings, they do not disappear. They simply fall silent, waiting for the moment when silence is no longer possible. After truth has surfaced, the relationship enters a phase society labels with very beautiful names. People say this is the time of stability, of greater understanding, of the beginning of real love. These affirmations carry great power because they allow people to keep moving forward without having to confront the quiet sense of loss that is taking place beneath the surface. In this phase, the absence of intense emotion is no longer viewed as a problem, but interpreted as a sign of maturity. Fewer arguments are considered harmony. Fewer expectations are considered realism. And the absence of longing is considered acceptance. Gradually, the relationship becomes smoother, but also flatter in a way that many fail to notice what is being traded away. People begin to adjust themselves to fit the shared rhythm of life. Natural reactions are restrained to avoid conflict. Personal desires are set aside to preserve a calm atmosphere. The initial flexibility, once an expression of affection, slowly turns into a habit of self-restraint. No one forces it, yet everyone learns not to voice the things that might shake this fragile state of stability. The danger lies in this: the process unfolds very slowly. There is no clear moment when a person can say, "I lost myself here." Everything happens through very small things: a hobby no longer pursued, a dream postponed, a part of one's personality hidden because it no longer fits. Each time the change seems reasonable. But when accumulated, they create a void that is difficult to name. At this point, the relationship is no longer sustained by attraction, but by familiarity. Two people know each other's schedules, habits, and reactions. That very familiarity provides a sense of safety, yet it also diminishes curiosity and exploration, the very elements that once drew them toward each other in the first place. Many believe this is the price to be paid for a stable shared life. They accept fewer moments of emotional resonance in exchange for predictability. They trade emotional depth for surface-level calm. And because this shift occurs simultaneously on both sides, no one notices that the relationship is becoming smaller than its original potential. This phase rarely causes immediate collapse. On the contrary, it creates a prolonged sense of stability. But that very stability conceals another reality. The relationship no longer drives growth. It demands that two people reduce themselves to fit within it. And when this shrinking is labeled as maturity, the cost is often recognized only much later. When a relationship exists long enough in this state of surface stability, a quiet phenomenon begins to unfold. People gradually stop living fully as themselves. Not through sudden changes, but through continuous, subtle adjustments so refined they are difficult to detect. Each concession is small, each retreat justified. But over time, the sum of these adjustments results in profound erosion. At first, changing oneself is seen as an expression of care. One person tones down impulsiveness to better suit the other. The other suppresses ambition to keep the shared rhythm of life from becoming too tense. These changes are often praised, seen as signs of maturity and consideration. Yet rarely does anyone ask, Do these changes arise from free choice or from fear of disrupting the stability that already exists? Gradually, the boundary between adaptation and self-abandonment becomes blurred. Certain interests are ignored. Certain desires are postponed for later. Certain aspects of personality are expressed only when the partner is not present. People learn to divide themselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts, bringing only the safe portion into the relationship. The irony is that the parts being removed are often the strongest sources of vitality. When they disappear, people not only lose their enthusiasm for life, but also become less vivid in the eyes of their partner. The relationship is no longer nourished by the attraction between two distinct individuals, but by habit and obligation. The erosion of identity does not cause immediate pain. It manifests as a nameless emptiness, as fatigue without a clear cause, as the feeling of playing a role in one's own life. Many fail to recognize that the source of this dissatisfaction does not lie in work or circumstance, but in having gone too long without living in alignment with their inner rhythm. At this stage, the relationship begins to lose its dialogical nature. Instead of two individuals exchanging and adjusting to each other, it becomes a structure that both strive to maintain. Preserving harmony becomes more important than telling the truth. Avoiding conflict becomes more important than being oneself. And it is precisely this silence that allows distance to grow ever wider. Not every relationship collapses when personal identity is eroded. Many continue to exist, even for a very long time. But the price is that inner vitality gradually runs dry. When people no longer recognize themselves within the shared life, the question, "What am I living for?" begins to surface. And from that question, deeper movements, though suppressed, quietly begin to form. When personal identity is eroded in silence, emotion does not disappear. It merely changes form. What was once a desire to live, passion, or curiosity gradually transforms into something else: silent resentment. Not loud, not immediately explosive, but slowly accumulating over years of shared life. Resentment rarely appears as overt anger. It seeps into small thoughts. Why am I always the one who has to give in? Why have I changed so much, yet nothing is ever enough? These questions are seldom spoken aloud, because people fear that speaking the truth will destabilize an already fragile equilibrium. But not voicing them does not make them disappear. It only causes them to sink deeper. Over time, each past adjustment is remembered differently. What was once seen as a voluntary choice is now reinterpreted as sacrifice. Every act of giving up becomes evidence that one has given too much. And when a person looks back on their life through this lens, a sense of injustice gradually takes shape, even though no one can clearly identify who caused it. This perceived imbalance emerges on both sides. Each person believes they are carrying the heavier load, enduring greater loss. This does not necessarily reflect reality, but rather the feeling of being deprived of the right to live in alignment with oneself. When people are unable to be themselves, they begin to count everything they have traded away, every opportunity they have missed. At this stage, the relationship is no longer experienced in the present, but pulled back into the past. Old stories are brought up again, past decisions revisited with a tone of reproach. Every argument no longer concerns only the issue at hand, but carries the weight of many years of silence. Notably, resentment often walks hand in hand with guilt. People are angry at their partner, yet also angry at themselves for having agreed to those compromises. But instead of confronting the anger directed inward, they find it easier to project it outward. The partner becomes the embodiment of everything that has been lost. This imbalance distorts communication more and more. A suggestion is heard as criticism. Silence is interpreted as indifference. Every action is filtered through suspicion. The relationship ceases to be a place of restoration and becomes a trigger for old wounds. Silent resentment does not destroy a relationship immediately. It does something more dangerous. It weakens the capacity for empathy. When people no longer feel seen, they no longer have the patience to see others. And from this emotional imbalance, the relationship begins to slide toward a point where turning back becomes increasingly difficult. No form of suppression lasts forever without consequence. When resentment has accumulated long enough, it no longer remains beneath the surface. It seeks release, often in ways that are difficult to control and deeply damaging. What surprises many people is not the breakdown itself, but the intensity of it. The eruption rarely stems from a single cause. It may begin with something very small, an offhand remark, an action that seems insignificant, a moment of indifference. Yet the reaction far exceeds the immediate cause, because what is being released is not only the emotion of the present moment, but the entire compressed mass of years of silence. At this stage, the relationship is no longer about two people trying to understand each other. It becomes a confrontation between two different narratives of the past. Each side carries a long list of what they have endured, the times they have yielded, the opportunities they have lost. Objective truth no longer matters. What matters is that the feeling of being hurt is acknowledged. Many attempt to escape this suffocating state through external connections. This is not always physical betrayal. Sometimes it is simply the search for the feeling of being seen, being heard, being oneself in another space. This is not the cause of collapse, but a symptom of a relationship that has lost the ability to nourish inner life. As conflict escalates, boundaries that once existed are broken. Private matters are dragged out and used as weapons. Words that were once restrained are now spoken without consideration. People are no longer trying to protect the relationship. They are trying to protect their wounded sense of self. What is most painful at this stage is the reversal of roles. The one who was once a source of support becomes a source of pain. The one who was once loved becomes an adversary. The relationship, originally built to provide a sense of safety, now becomes a trigger for fear and defense. No one trusts enough anymore to be vulnerable. In the moment of eruption, many people believe that destroying everything is the only way out. They want to end not only the relationship, but also the version of themselves that existed within it. The anger directed outward, in fact, conceals a deep disappointment with oneself for having accepted, for too long, a life that no longer reflected one's true self. The release that comes with the outburst is not merely an attempt to end a relationship. It is a desperate effort to reclaim the feeling of being alive, even if the price is total devastation. And when the storm has passed, what often remains is emptiness, along with a difficult question. Could things have been different if the truth had been heard earlier? After the collapse occurs, whether loudly or quietly, what remains is not only the pain of a relationship ending, but a deeper void. The void of questions that were never asked from the beginning. Many people spend enormous energy analyzing who was right, who was wrong, what ruined everything. But these questions rarely touch the core. The problem lies not in individual actions, but in how people understand and construct attachment from the very start. Most broken relationships do not fail because of a lack of love, but because they place too many expectations on love itself. People expect attachment to provide completeness, safety, and long-term stability, while emotion by nature is always changing. When attachment is tasked with supporting an entire inner life, sooner or later, it becomes a burden. Redefining attachment does not mean rejecting commitment or denying the need for connection. It requires a subtle, yet fundamental shift, from seeking completion in another person to taking responsibility for one's own inner life. When someone does not clearly understand who they are, what they need, and where they are going, every relationship is likely to become a place of compensation rather than companionship. A healthy relationship does not begin with lack, but with relative wholeness. Two people enter connection not to fill a void, but to expand each other's living space. They do not need to continually sacrifice themselves to hold on to one another, because each already has a foundation on which to stand. In this context, differences are no longer threats, but opportunities for learning and adjustment. When attachment is built on choice rather than fear, it becomes more flexible. Two people stay together not because they cannot leave, but because they choose to continue growing together. And if at some point their paths no longer run side by side, the ending, though painful, does not carry the feeling of having betrayed oneself. This approach demands more courage than familiar models. It requires people to abandon the illusion of absolute security and accept that no form of binding can freeze emotion or prevent change. But in return, it opens the possibility of building more authentic connections, where no one has to shrink themselves to fit another. Redefining attachment is not a promise of eternal happiness. It is an invitation to live more honestly, honest with one's emotions, one's needs, and one's limits. When people dare to do this, relationships cease to be places where identity is buried and become spaces in which each person can continue to grow into a more complete version of themselves. In the end, the question is no longer why so many marriages collapse, but with what inner posture we enter love in the first place. If we love to fill emptiness, marriage becomes a burden. If we love to escape loneliness, family becomes a cage. But if we love from maturity, from responsibility for our own inner life, then love can become a space in which both people grow. Nietzsche once reminded us that true strength does not come from dependence, but from the ability to stand on one's own. A lasting family is not built on the fear of losing one another, but on the choice to stay. Every single day. If this video made you reflect, please like, subscribe, and share it with those who are searching for answers about love and marriage. And leave a comment. Are you loving from a place of lack or from a place of wholeness?